الو بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
شغال. مش شغالة مش شغالة.
كل القاعة ديت ولازم فيها.
مين الاورجنايزر بتاع انهي واحدة فيهم بقى؟
اهي اللي بتشاور بايديها الاثنين اللي قصاد بعض. فاضل دقيقتين بالظبط على بداية الجلسة. وقعت السماعة. وقعت العصا خدت عليها راحت مخفية على كويس ده وقعت على الأرض. ممكن تيجي القاعة والنبي عليه اسمع معلش.
Good morning, everybody. We are about to begin. If you can all start taking your seats, that would be really appreciated, particularly the Dutch at the front, who are always somewhat trouble. Thank you, everybody. So, without further ado, we are going to open the session this morning, which is titled From COP27 to the UN23 Water Conference. We're here to explore with you about accelerating action on water and adaptation. We'll start with a short video, and then it will be more from me and our wonderful speakers.
Water is a resource with many shapes and forms, and by nature, it connects different environments, peoples, and sectors. Water is irreplaceable for life to survive and thrive. Water is a unifying and catalyzing force. It can be the deal maker for creating a more sustainable world.
Water underpins all of our social and economic activity. Without water, food production stops. Cities cease to function. Economic activity grinds to a halt, and fertile land turns into a desert.
We have massive challenges in front of us, and to steer the world in the right direction, we need to join forces and take action. The UN 2023 Water Conference will be this moment.
Tajikistan and the Netherlands, as co-hosts of the conference, strive to make it a watershed moment for the world. So let's join our efforts, take commitments, and put actions on the ground to make this happen.
We have an important task to encourage all stakeholders, to bring together all our pledges, promises, and commitments, and to make clear how the world will reach its water-related goals.
Many things were politically unclear at that time. Now, the young leaders should be given a leading role by their governments in order to be active in the next decade.
Water does not only pose a challenge, it also presents us with great opportunity. We need to act and foster a fundamental shift in how we look at and manage water more than ever.
Imagine what kind of world we could live in if its leaders had just a fraction of the idealism that we share as young people.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Is the sound sufficiently good? Fabulous. What an inspiring video and a fabulous way to start the event. I would like to welcome you all formally to this session. Can I get a quick show of hands as to who is aware of what the UN23 conference is? Oh my goodness, amazing. So we're speaking to a room full of converts, in which case, welcome again, and how lovely. I'm sure you'll be very kind to all of our panelists and distinctive speakers today. My name is Cate. I'm the Global Director of Water Security at CDP, and I've been working with both the Dutch and the Tajikistani teams over the last year and a half to accelerate progress on water security for a climate resilient and low carbon future. I'm really proud to be hosting the session today, and we've got a whole range of amazing speakers. Ultimately, what we want each of you in the room to leave today is inspired by the future that we want, inspired to run towards that future by making strong, clear commitments from you as individuals and from you as from your professional institutions to play your part in triggering the change that is ultimately essential and the change that we all need to see. So I am going to open, and first of all, introduce two distinguished speakers who will set the scene for our session today. The first is Her Excellency, Miss Liesje Schrijnmacher. Luckily, I'm from Liverpool and so can get the little twang in there at times. Liesje is the Minister of Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation for the Government of the Netherlands. Please, Liesje, please take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to start with a little thought experiment. Think about energy and the way we deal with energy, the lengths that we go through to provide energy for our people, and the scarcity of energy. And now I would like you to replace the word energy for water, because this is how we need to start approaching water. Water is not just a responsibility for ministers of water, it should have an entire, a whole of government approach. And in a second, I will tell you why. And it's a pleasure for me to be here today in the run-up to the UN 2023 Water Conference. And we are proud co-hosts, together with our colleagues and friends from Tajikistan. And today we're taking a deep dive into the interactive dialogue theme, Water for Climate, Resilience and Environment. And we all know that climate change is amplifying all challenges connected to water. There's either too much water, too little water, or it's too polluted. And 9 out of 10 natural disasters that happened during the last decade were related to water. And it's clear that stronger political leadership needs to be at the heart of global and local climate politics. Integrating water into public investments is vital, because not only is water one of the main drivers for climate mitigation, it's also our best opportunity for resilience and adaptation. This also means that we need to bridge the divide between the different groups involved, urgently. So let's bring in the economics and financial experts to truly integrate water and nature into our public decision-making, using all available technologies and insights on disaster risk reduction. And, of course, involving the communities affected. Only by uniting on water can we build a truly resilient society. Ladies and gentlemen, cooperation is key. In the crucial years that lie ahead, the Netherlands will help reduce climate change vulnerability worldwide. Together, we can strengthen the capacity of people and ecosystems to adapt and increase their climate resilience. A good example of this is the joint effort by Egypt and the Netherlands to strengthen Egypt's northern shoreline. Using what we call a sand motor, we're harnessing the power of nature to make the coast more resilient to rising sea levels. Recently, the Netherlands published its global climate strategy, in which we are doubling public and private climate finance. And we will raise our spending on water and adaptation, resulting in an annual budget for water of 240 million euros. We will use the money specifically to support the most vulnerable countries. Still, it's clear that more is needed. And it's painful truth that up till now, our collective actions have not made enough difference. And the window of opportunity is closing fast. So I call on you to speed up your commitments for the Water Action Agenda in the run-up to the UN 2023 Water Conference. Many countries, institutions, and businesses are already swinging into action. And let me elaborate on one commitment that the Netherlands will present in March at the Water Conference. A commitment with a budget of tens of millions of euros for 5 years. It revolves around an ambitious partnership that aims to use data to better protect people and their livelihoods. Currently, half of the world's population lives in areas that are highly vulnerable to climate change, and a third is not protected by early warning systems. And by using the opportunities provided by satellite data and cloud technology, we can turn things around. That is why we're joining up with key partners in the field. The World Meteorological Organization, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and the Climate Center at the Netherlands Red Cross. Of course, data alone doesn't save lives, but enabling communities to use the information to protect their lives and businesses does. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I hope to see many more such commitments being prepared for the Water Action Agenda in the run-up to March. And just in a few seconds, we will discuss your ideas for future solutions on water. And I'm looking forward to having these conversations with you. But first, I'll hand over to my colleague from Tajikistan, who will tell you more about the preparations for the water conference that we're hosting in March. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Let's hope your multi-millions will unlock the billions and the trillions over time that we need to solve the global crisis. It is my great pleasure to welcome on stage His Excellency Jamshed Shoyamzoda, who is the first Deputy Minister of Energy and Water Resources of the Republic of Tajikistan. Thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Minister Schlegelmacher, Excellencies, dear participants, as the Minister also mentioned, the energy is very related to the water. And for case of Tajikistan, we, Minister of Energy and Water Resources, we are already going to the right direction. Of course, it's my great pleasure to address you in this important session on behalf of the Republic of Tajikistan, the country which has been promoting the water issues in the global development agenda for the last 2 decades. In this period, by initiative of Tajikistan, 8 water-related UN General Assembly resolutions were adopted, including one on declaring the International Decade for Action Water for Sustainable Development. For the midterm review of this decade, as the UN Water Conference will be organized next March in New York. As my colleague already mentioned it, and Tajikistan is honored by jointly with the Netherlands to co-host this historical conference. Taking this opportunity, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the government of Netherlands, Minister Schlegelmacher and our Dutch colleagues for very good partnership and fruitful cooperation towards the UN 2023 Water Conference. A lot of work has been done so far by Tajikistan and the Netherlands, with the support of course UNDRRR and UN Water, through exclusive cross-sectoral and action-oriented process. This collaborative and transparent work has allowed us to have common understanding and well-aimed support from member states, UN, and its entities, international organizations, financial institutions, and other stakeholders, and finalizing the terms of interactive dialogue during the PJ meeting on October 25. The whole team did a great job. to finalize the topic of the conference. All possible platforms were used, and all stakeholders were involved, including women and yours. And you might see in the presentation the 5 themes of this interactive dialogue. And of course, the question why we are here. We are here to bring your attention to a very important meeting. Last 2 COPs shows that water is very important for the climate. As the minister mentioned, that 8 any problems coming through the water in the climate issues. And that's why now we in this session also we have five themes on interactive dialogues. We will be focusing on the theme number 3, water for climate resilience and environment. And we already know that 74% of any impacts in the climate change coming through the water. As the minister mentioned, it is floods, is dry years, and everything, just imagine, is 74%. Ladies and gentlemen, we have only a bit more than 4 months ahead of us until the conference. And therefore, we have to pay the great attention. They put every effort to the outcome of this important gathering. It should be a historical conference, not only in the term of the time of the missions, but because of these results and impacts. It's my honor to hear that the Netherlands already starting to provide the commitments. It's a very good start for the preparation process for the conference. In this regard, both the preparatory process and the conference itself, I am to draw attention to the commitments to have an impact and set a clear agenda for the second half of the decade, beyond 2030, while promoting long-term approach. It's very important to create a vision beyond 2030, to expand commitments, including concrete actions, agreements, efforts will be made to promote successful and scalable solution. For that to happen, a new initiative was presented in the framework of the second Dushanbe Water Conference, namely Water Action Agenda, a set of voluntary commitments to accelerate action towards achieving international agreed water-related goals and targets. Her Excellency Minister also mentioned about this, that it's very important to focus to the water action agenda. Of course, it's voluntary commitments, but what we are doing for the water issues, we should do yesterday, not tomorrow. That's important. That's important, not just only have a conference, as I mentioned as it is, but it has a conference for the get a good impact. Tajikistan and Israel are making every effort to take the conference a truly watershed moment in the world. However, we will not be able to achieve the success alone. We need your support, your political will and leadership, and your strong commitments. The commitment should be innovative, transformative, and a game changer. The commitment around which we could build partnership and coalition to have a big impact. We invite all of you to join us in this historical mission to help us to get the world back on the track to achieve the water-related goals and targets by 2030. Water is a great power connecting the continents, countries, peoples, and cultures. Water is source of our life. So let's be united for water. It's diverse to highly valued and respected. We want a conference unites the world. It is a great opportunity for all of us. So let's use this appropriately since there is no time to waste. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister, for those rousing words. The call to action is exactly what we need, and we're going to now harness that call to action with the panel discussion. And can I invite my first round of panelists to stop looking at your phones and come up onto the stage, please? Our audience are dying to hear from you, so please all come up. I'm going to, thank you, Joyce. I will not run through every single name and title because they are up on the screen behind us, and we have precious time together. And so I think for those of you that can read, Togni, sorry, you're on the next panel, not this one, but and I like your enthusiasm. Please, any order, please take your seats. So thank you, everybody. Now, this first panel, and there are 2 today, The first panel is focused on water resilience, adaptation, and nature-based solutions. So again, a show of hands, who doesn't know what a nature-based solution is? Great. Oh, 2 people. Okay, well, speak to us afterwards and we can let you know what they are, as you're in the minority. So we've got a fabulous presentation, fabulous panel today, ranging from individuals who've got exposure in the private sector, the urban sector, the SID sector, and across the African context. And we're going to be focusing in on the solutions that they themselves have been able to execute on and explore with them and ultimately eventually with you about how we can put these to scale, because the time is now, as we've heard. We can no longer wait for acting on water security for a climate resilient future. So I'm going to start with you, Alicia. Climate change manifests itself through too much, too little, or too polluted water, as those of you in the room will already know. In this panel, as I say, we're going to identify how we can accelerate adaptation and resilience to climate change through nature-based solutions. And so, Alicia, from a youth perspective, what do you believe youth can do to help governments, private sector, and other organizations to make this happen?
Thank you very much. Well, something very important for young people and in general for movements of different vulnerable communities is to be included in the decision making, in policy making, to make it democratized. So water is a human right and it's closely linked to health. I'm speaking more about health because I have more like a health background, but in that regards, as it is a human right, it should be available for every person in this world. Now this is not happening, and it's a shame. So we need to tackle this by including, for example, if we are talking about nature-based solutions, indigenous peoples in my country. I'm not like speaking on behalf of them, but I have talked a lot to them, and they have incredible knowledge on how to work with the environment. Because I think that many times what happens is that we have this Western view that these are natural resources, but actually like are apart from humans. But actually, we're all part of a complex ecosystem. Humans are part of a bigger complex ecosystem that includes water, includes air, includes soil, includes all the biodiversity. And we have to work with them to have a better society, not like just to see them as natural resources, to have them for inputs for polluting industries, but to have them for our health, for the environment, for the health of the biodiversity as well. So in this sense, for nature-based solutions, I would really recommend to hear to indigenous peoples, indigenous youth, because they have excellent initiatives and their voices are to be heard in a meaningful way and not in a tokenistic way. For young people, we are incredible, I believe, in spreading the word, in spreading the message across social media to raise awareness on this very incredibly important topic, many times overlooked, but so necessary now to tackle climate change and water scarcity that in the years to come is going to be worse and worse. I'm a bit afraid like what's going to happen when I am 50, because many of my colleagues will face water scarcity. My country will face more water scarcity. So it's time to act now and be part of the policies that will affect our futures.
Thank you, Alicia, and let's hope that we can channel that fear and that outrage into optimism and action. I think it's a really powerful source of change, of course, and one. I'm growing my own youth at the moment, 5-year-old daughter, and I'm similarly excited about her potential and how we can untap that. Over to you, Ambassador Chivavi. Beira and other parts of Mozambique often experience cyclones that can cause heavy flooding and affect, of course, a huge proportion of the population. What has been successful that can be scaled in other parts of the world, and what more needs to be done from your perspective on that front?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, all protocol observed. We are immensely honored to be here present in this session. Water, in this context, plays a strategic and essential role in sustainable development. We truly recognize that climate change, both in Mozambique and in the world, constitutes a major challenge for humanity. The availability of water in quantity and quality is still a challenge for Africa, and particularly for Mozambique, which is considered a vulnerable country due to its downstream geographical location and dependence on runoff generated in upstream countries. This situation is even worse in the context in which the country is feeling the impact of climate change with great intensity. For this reason, my country and cooperation partners have carried outset of efforts and necessary strategic action in order to opt for more resilient solutions in the section infrastructure, from the construction of dams, excavated reservoir, to the infrastructure of conventional water supply system, and using desalination technology. The Mozambican water policy defends that water must be available in adequate quantity and quality for different generations, serving for sustainable development, poverty reduction, promotion of well-being and peace, and minimization of the effects of flood and drought, and defense for the horizon of the Sustainable Development Goals, universal coverage. And in Mozambique, we say that without water, there's no life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. I think given that this is an African COP, it's vital that we get the perspectives of a range of different participants across that entire continent, and it's brilliant to hear the work that's underway within Mozambique already, and hopefully get others inspired to lean in and do more. On to you, Aramar. How can we commit to bridge the gap between water and adaptation using nature-based solutions?
Well, I've got to be very frank, not only as a member of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, but also from the IPCC, where I've led the 1.5 report and the new assessment report. And I'll say that we're actually getting the challenge wrong. It's not about nature-based solutions. The first thing is not to mess continuously with nature. So if we stop messing with nature, whether it's the oceans or the atmosphere, that will stop creating the challenges that we're dealing with today. So we're at 1.1 degrees at the moment, and unfortunately, the goals that we've set are temperature goals. My contention is that if we really found climate as a critical problem in the tropics, we might have had a precipitation goal, because that's the most important thing that connects us all in the world today. Because for the first time in history, our economy and our human activity is jeopardizing water at its very source. This is the first year in which science is showing that we've actually breached the planetary boundary on water. And that is the critical factor that I think this conference has to address. It's not only about water crisis locally, we've had that for thousands of years. Egypt, in some senses, is one of the quintessential countries that have dealt with this for 5,000 years. The challenge today is that we have a global water crisis. So we do have to address this not only at the local and the regional level, but we have to address this at a global level. And from the Global Commission, which we hope to sort of kick off in a significant way in March, there are 3 or 4 things that we need to do. For us, we're trying to help redefine how we value and govern water as a global common good. It is a local good, no question about it. It's a regional good, it's a transboundary good, but we have to look at it at all of the scales at the moment. And we have to absolutely better understand the linkage between water, economic development, climate change, and biodiversity. So the 2 big conventions that are coming up just now, the Sustainable Development Goals in the midterm review, and of course, how we live, because post-COVID, this is one of the most serious crises that we're dealing with. So when we're talking about resilience, It's talking about the resilience of everyday life, the resilience of our economies, whether it's agriculture or industry or even the services industry. And we're talking about maintaining peace and security in many parts of the world, because this is one of the most serious challenges, we don't necessarily see it, to peace and security in some of the most vulnerable regions in the world. That's how we will build that resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Aramar. I think perhaps one of the key messages to walk away with today then is one of the most powerful and urgent and priority nature-based solutions is to leave nature alone and allow it to do its good job that it does for us all. Indeed, some of the statistics that you are throwing out are indeed ones that keep all of us awake at night. And so it's really fabulous to hear the work of the Commission that's underway and triggering a true transformation in the way in which the world appreciates this resource. As somebody that's been involved in this endeavour for a decade, it gives me great confidence to know that people like you are looking at this topic. So thank you. And it's fabulous to bring the two worlds together. I was having a conversation this morning with somebody who's really championing green hydrogen. And he said, well, you know, that green hydrogen is not that water intensive. It's okay. I said, that's fine. I said, but where do you think the water is going to come from to power the green hydrogen? There has to be a discussion about the assumption that some of the net zero transition plans are making, that water will always be available wherever they want it and whenever they need it. And it struck him that that's the conversation that he hadn't been having, and that we can unpick that assumption more and bring the worlds together. That's a really powerful moment. And of course, why we're all here today. Rachel, onto you, private sector. From your perspective, what is it that your company is doing to commit to using the power of nature and its source as a natural resource to deliver on your goals?
Thank you, Cate. And indeed, I think, as all my panelists have also referred to, water is cross-sectoral. That's not a surprise for everyone. We know it touches all of the SDGs and much more than just SDG 6. But what we also know is that water is a catalyst for climate action and biodiversity regeneration. And I love what you were saying, we shouldn't interfere in the natural world, but actually we really need to regenerate the natural world. So Van Oord, as a member of the Dutch water sector and a private company in this discussion, we are already trying to deliver on commitments to work with water and work with the climate action agenda and in a nature-based way. And one of the examples I would like to share is that we've delivered an open source data platform to look at coastal vulnerability. Our tool is called the Climate Risk Overview, and we layer data on data to try and understand which coastal communities are most exposed to sea level rise and more severe weather. Because this is causing flooding, so that's the too much water discussion. And so we're trying to deliver on these commitments, and we've made this tool public because this is a public discussion that we need to be having, not a private sector or a financial institutions or the research institutions or the government bodies. We need to be talking about it together. Not only that, but we have a moral responsibility towards our youth and our future generations to really share this knowledge that we have, all of these different sectors, to address exactly as you touched on, the water, climate, biodiversity nexus. Those things cannot be separated, they are inextricably linked. And I think when we talk about coastal resilience specifically, I think we have to understand how many people are at risk, even at a 1.5 degree scenario. We are talking about the displacement of almost 50 million people. And we're talking about the impact on the economic GDP of maybe up to 20% because of that in a 1.5 degree scenario. And that's really important, that we cannot wait until we have big disasters to start acting. We need to act now, and that's why I'm very happy to be part of this discussion. What we see in these coastal areas that are increasingly at risk is that it's affecting local communities, but let's not forget, in the end, it affects us all. We need to have better alignment between the different sectors, and I'm happy that the governments of the Netherlands and Tajikistan are bringing together all those sectors for the UN Water Conference next year, So we are working together with private sector, with the government, but also with those financial institutions, with the research institutions and the local communities and the youngsters, and I'm happy to see representatives here in the audience as well, to really find those solutions that we can bring together, and for two reasons, because we need speed and we need scale. And the success of that will come out of collaboration. Cooperation is key for this. And let's get out of our comfort zone where we all operate in our silos and make this happen.
Thank you, Rachel. That's really encouraging. At CDP, we work with over 4,000 companies on water and about 15,000 on climate. And it's safe to say that the vast majority have woken up to the reality of the need to collaborate on these topics, as there is a possibility that a company operating independently can become what we call a clean fish in a dirty pond. It gets its own house in order, it enables its own resilience, but there are instances where that then comes at the expense of the local communities that house it. Hence, they lose their social license to operate or their legal license to operate. I think those companies that have woken up to this issue are those companies that will be thriving into the future. Anybody else that hasn't yet woken up to that reality, better do so soon or risk oblivion. Back to our ambassador, please, if you don't mind, Ambassador Chivavi. You mentioned that you have been conducting a lot of work in the region, in your country, to make your water systems more resilient. Perhaps you could speak to that a little bit more and explore what you've been doing from a nature perspective and any commitments that you might have.
Thank you, Moderator. Well, in fact, the city of Beira and other cities such Maputo, Matola, Pemba, even I can mention Shimoyo, we have been constantly affected by floods that put infrastructures at risk. The large population from their areas of residence, thank you, and create high economic losses. The implementation of urban sanitation project and the Cyclone Idai and Cate emergency recovery and resilience project are part of the action currently underway. The urban sanitation project, which aims to finance increased access of sanitation services, include priority investment in sanitation in coastal cities, namely the city of Maputo, Quelimane center of Mozambique, and the Maputo south of Mozambique, capital city, with the aim of rehabilitating and building whatever treatment plants, construction of facial sludge treatment plants, construction of latrines, septic tanks, rehabilitation and the construction of sewerage and drainage network. The Cyclone Idai and Cate emergency recovery and resilience projects, which includes a climate resilient competent, takes a holistic approach to recovery and reconstruction, with reducing the vulnerable of affected areas to climate change, to climate-related hazard through repair and significant enhancement of coastal protection and expansion of the drainage system of the city of Beira. In this project, we have a natural-based solution implemented at Beira that we call green infrastructural that protect mangal and wetland ecosystem, environments, restoration, increasing social and economic environment and protection, including recreational infrastructures. In fact, in my country, we are facing so many challenges on the issue of cyclones. Each and every year, we face about between 4 to 6 cyclones, and so many water, because Mozambique we receive water from Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So each and every year we're suffering about floods in my country, as well as cyclones. Even the city of Beira, which is center of Mozambique, the people, they say nowadays that Beira now is a headquarter of transition of the wind, because each and every year the people are suffering about cyclones and too much wind in Beira city. Thank you very much, Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's really devastating to hear the stories emerging from countries such as yours that are on the front line of climate catastrophe, but really encouraging to hear the work underway to protect wetlands. Not only are the protection of wetlands a really solid source of climate resilience, but of course they're also a huge carbon sink. In fact, wetlands, they will absorb twice the amount of carbon as forests do, but they're being lost currently at 3 times the rate of world's forests. So it's really excellent to hear that work is underway, and perhaps an initiative or a commitment that those in the room could inspire other countries to consider taking. Over to you, Aramar. Cities and municipalities are really where the rubber hits the road in terms of action to adapt and become more resilient to climate change. From your perspective as an urban expert and obviously the lead expert or a lead expert in the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, what are the economic dynamics that can help cities in their decision making?
One of the obvious things that came out in the current IPCC cycle, even from the point of mitigation, when you're dealing with urban heat islands, where most cities now are well beyond 1.5 in many parts of the world, is green and blue infrastructure. Very simple things, trees and water. Because trees, because of evapotranspiration, reduce temperatures, and water, because of evaporation and the impact that it has, actually improves the temperatures. They make a dramatic difference to the microclimate and the survivability of cities. That's the first thing. The second thing that's pretty obvious is that we think of cities as very robust entities. So whether it's because of extreme weather, cyclonic storms, or storm surge, or more critically in many places in the world, drought. Drought, in some senses, is a highly underrated risk that cities across the world are going to be exposed to. You will take water from further and further away, source sustainability will be an issue, but more important, we have a serious problem about food security. Cities don't produce food on their own. We have to rethink not only our institutions but our food systems to be able to provide food security to people who live in urban areas. We're 50% urban at the moment, and as far as the planet is concerned, we're going to hit 70% urbanization. So food and water security are intensely tied together. And the reason I'm saying this and why that's important is, if we have a global overshoot beyond 1.5, the magic bullet that many people are talking about is called carbon capture and storage. And how does that happen? That happens in the most simple way, by growing things on land. And that is constrained by a very simple question. In most parts of the world, especially in the global south, but also in the north, that is constrained by water. So you will not be able to implement carbon dioxide removal and storage without equitable access to water. And I can tell you from my own experience of doing this in India at very large scale, our institutions, our incentives, our economics are not fit for purpose for a 1.5 world. And the reason for that is water.
Thank you so much. Apologies for being distracted. I'm just figuring out with Joyce when we're ending, but you're absolutely right. And again, my experience at CDP, not only do we work with private sector, but we work with cities. We've got over 1,000 cities now disclosing climate and water-related interventions that they are taking. And whilst the vast majority of cities that are disclosing tell us that they are exposed to water insecurity risks, either driven by climate change or other factors, less than half have got water management plans in place. Very few understand where their water comes from and have no plans yet to protect their sources of water, let alone begin investing in the infrastructure that we're hearing coming out of Mozambique. So it's, again, another area. Perhaps you can think of this as a risk at the moment, and of course it is, but it is an opportunity to act. And apologies, I know I must talk right into here, but it's very difficult to do the same. Thank you, Ravi. Okay, Rachel, over to you for a final question before I come back over to Alicia for the final word of the panel. Rachel, Van Oord's work is ultimately maritime focused. So whilst we're talking today about the sweet stuff, what's probably you're more comfortable talking about is the salty stuff. What have you learned from your work in maritime waters, and what perhaps could we take from that into the freshwater landscapes?
Yeah, I'd really like to build on now this discussion around nature-based solutions, or in the infrastructure world, what we call building with nature. In the historical past, we've delivered, I think, what is now coined very often by Henke's stupid infrastructure, where we're not worked with nature. It's not accounting for the impact it's having on water, on climate, on biodiversity. And I think we need to move away to the what we call green-grey or even green infrastructure. And I think something that's really important to understand when we work with nature, it's not the same as when we deliver, and I'm going to go really technical here, sorry, I'm an engineer. But when we calculate a seawall that's made of concrete, we can do the calculations. And when we work with nature, we have to look at it from a different perspective. And that's what we're learning now in the marine space, which I think can translate into nature-based solutions across all spaces. And what you really need to understand when you work with nature is that it's naturally dynamic. That means it's also multifunctional. So if we work with mangroves, for example, not only are they protecting a coastline, but they're sequestering carbon. They're providing a nursery for fisheries and many, many other functionalities. You also need to understand, though, that this is a very innovative space. So we are still piloting, and every time we design, it's context specific to the location where we are working. And I'd really like to give an example, if I may, and I'm really happy that the ambassador touched on Quelimane, a city in Mozambique where we are working now to try and deliver a mangrove solution, and maybe to explain what that looks like. So Quelimane has a problem with flooding. Too much water. And they're at the coast, and it's part of a river basin, so you need to look at the whole landscape scale. We as a company can bring our technical knowledge and expertise, but what's so critical to the success of this project is working with the local communities, understanding what is happening, why has the mangrove forest there decreased so heavily, and what do we need to do technically to restore it, but also with the social elements to make sure that it actually sustains, and it's not a seawall that will collapse in 25 years from now and not survive. So it's really critical when working on these nature-based solutions to look at the biodiversity, but also the local population. And this is just one example to really stress why you need to work with the local communities and all those other partners, which I stressed in my previous answer, to really make these things a success. So I hope those things can really be brought through into many other spaces when working with nature-based solutions. And fundamentally, I think it can really come down to capacity building, and I've heard that so much this week at the COP27. Capacity building is key, and that is something that all sectors can do much better when we share our knowledge and expertise cross-sectorally and across different institutions. So what I would really like to close by saying is, we have the solutions. We know how to deliver nature-based solutions, to work with nature, and we know how we need to collaborate, get out of our comfort zones and work together. So let's stop thinking about it and let's actually start doing it.
Thank you, Rachel. If I might just ask one follow-on question, and I think it'd be useful or interesting for our audience to understand, why is Van Oord investing or taking that action in Quelimane? What's the benefit for Van Oord as a traditional business, for example? For those businesses sitting in the room may not always be aware of why you would do that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Cate, and it's a question we get more often, of course, being the private sector. Van Oord is a family-owned and still family-owned company that's operated for over 150 years. And we've worked in those 150 years building up incredible knowledge and expertise and keeping the Dutch feet dry. And actually now we genuinely feel a moral responsibility to share that knowledge with the rest of the world that we've spent all those years building up. It really needs to come to that businesses also understand their place in these discussions. And that's why we're doing it.
Fabulous. Well, thank you on behalf of all of us for taking that leadership position. Okay, back to you now, last but not least, Alicia, and I know we haven't heard a huge amount from you, but I wanted to give you a moment and an opportunity to hear from the senior leaders and to have a moment of reflection, really. Are you leaving here more confident? What you've heard from our senior panelists, does it give you hope? Is it enough?
Well, I would like to start by echoing Aromar's comments on that we need an equitable access to water. So I believe it's like a matter of principles before holding any project, that water is a human right. It should not be for profit. It should not be a commodity. It should be accessible to every person in this world. There are places, just to set an example, where water is used for inputs for mining activities, whereas their workers are there with no access to water. They cannot calm their thirst, which is also affecting their health. And this kind of things where water is not used in the correct way is what we need to tackle. We need to avoid the natural resources to become a profit. We need to make it accessible for each one of us, because that's the way we're really going to have a better society for all in a democratized way.
Thank you, Alicia. And so thank you. If I might ask you from a personal perspective, what are you going to be doing to make sure that everybody on the panel today and everybody in the room keeps their promises, that they keep their promises, if you didn't hear that?
I think we need to be watching carefully their commitments. We need to be very attentive to their activities and like to see how their words are delivered into action and how their actions are respectful of not only the humans that are in the setting they're executing the projects, but also the biodiversity, the communities, the soil. I mean, all this complex system we live in. They should all, like all of these complex systems should benefit from these projects that are aiming for water resilience. We need to be, as young people, what we need to ask is for accountability for these initiatives.
Thank you, and I think that's exactly the word that I was looking for and hoping that you would use. So I look forward to you playing that role in more future. I think it would make all of our jobs a lot easier, quite frankly, if you continue with those loud messages and holding truth to power. So please join me in thanking our panel and give them a very warm round of applause. Thank you, everybody. And if I may ask you to exit stage left, thank you. And if our new panel members would like to come up to the stage, I would be delighted to host you. And for those of you sitting down, can I ask you to stand for a moment? I shall do that as well, of course. And just have a shake. You know, you've made it through the first week. Congratulations if you've been here for that entire time. There is another week to go, so, you know, slow and steady wins the race, but it is useful to, you know, wake your legs up again. We've got another hour of this session. I know my legs need a bit of a shake and a stretch. So thank you. You can sit down again or stay standing if you prefer, but if you do, stand at the back. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I have a very exciting, distinguished panel that you can see, again, names and titles behind me. I will not spend time introducing them all because I am going to assume that you can read. You have made it this far, so I think that was hopefully a safe assumption. So this second panel is all around water for ecosystems. As you've just heard in our previous panel, the value of water-related ecosystems from both a resilience and a mitigation perspective is humongous. And at the moment, it's not generally well recognized within the climate community that these vital natural resources and natural spaces have a specific and vital role to play in accelerating the low-carbon transition. We're specifically going to be talking today about source to sea and disaster risk reduction. And I'm going to kick off our panel, the purpose of which is to examine the relationship between the preservation of freshwater ecosystems and their ability to reduce the risk of disasters, especially in the context of this source-to-sea approach. So for those of you, again, perhaps a little bit unfamiliar with that approach, Torgny from SIWI is going to explain a little bit more about what that means in a moment. We believe that there is an opportunity to bring forward this particular type of action starting here today at COP27. So what I want you to be thinking about as we're talking about and going through the panel is, again, what role can I play? What can I do in the next hour after this event, in the next week after the event, and in the next 3 weeks after the event to enable either myself personally or the institution that I'm working through to consider making a commitment around, in this case, source to sea and disaster risk reduction, because we need all hands on deck. So from your point of view, and let's start with you, Phil. So Phil is here representing an Indigenous community from Australia, and I will not try and pronounce it because I will butcher it. Apologies, Phil, but please feel free to tell everybody in the audience where you're from. I was trying to practice my Australian accent, but it's still a work in progress. So from your point of view, what types of commitments are needed to ensure the protection of freshwater ecosystems, to reduce the impact of disasters, and what is your community doing to make this happen?
Firstly, Yama, that's hello in my language, and I'm a very proud Gomeroi Māori, that's a very proud Gamilaroi man. Thank you. Look, for 60,000 years, Indigenous people have walked softly across the country called Australia. And I want to applaud you, Mr. Ravi. We've got to stop interfering with nature. Our connection to country and Indigenous people's connection to country around the world globally could be the missing ingredient in water management, land management. Water's centrality to our cultural way of life, to our way of life, has sustained us as Indigenous people on the driest inhabited continent on this planet. We continue to come to the table to bring our knowledge. It was called traditional ecological knowledge. We've transgressed that. We're calling it a cultural science. And that is not unique to Indigenous Australia. That is global. It should be, cultural science has many forms from many Indigenous people from many countries. It could be the very connector that allows us for stronger collaboration, not only within the cultural footprints and within the footprints of each country that we come from, but it could be the very connector globally that brings us together, that unites us on a platform of stronger collaboration, respect, sharing knowledge. We've seen the changing flow regimes. In my country, my nation, within the nation of Australia, we have 11 rivers. And within the Murray-Darling Basin, we've seen the impacts on native fish stocks that are down to less than 10% since colonisation, since first contact. And the way forward is we are sharing the load, sharing the journey and sharing our knowledge. We will be moving forward into the future with less resources. But what price do we put on our willingness to share our knowledge, to collaborate, to bring Western science and cultural science together, not just within our countries, but globally? I hope that the UN 2023 World Water Conference has a strong focus. I believe it's a missing ingredient, and I believe it's an ingredient and a methodology that can unite us globally. Water fit for purpose, quality of life, longevity of life. We need to start looking at planning not for a term of government, 4, 5, 6 years. We need to start planning for 20 to 50 years. Infrastructure that can stand the test of time, stand the challenges of climate change, the shifting sands, the shifting countries. Otherwise, we'll be seeing more and more and more paleo channels. In other words, our rivers disappearing right before our eyes. I'm happy to sit before you today and put a challenge to us globally on how we can be better together. To come to the table with a wondering mind, exploring what we can do, the head, the hearts, and the hands. We've got all this knowledge. We've all got a passion, a sincere passion to wanting to make a difference. Are we willing to join hands to do this together? My people in Australia have operated in a vacuum of opportunity since first contact, and it has been a struggle. Life expectancies of men and women in communities at 38 years of age, 42 for women. It's unconscionable to think that lack of water is a key driver in those statistics. So collaboration to close the gap with water management, land management, and a vision that is based on our thoughts of what we want to leave our future generations. We will not be judged, we are being judged by today's youth on what we leave them. And I've probably spoken a bit too much, Ms. Moderator.
Please carry
But I
on.
want you to think about, one image is this wonderful woman taking a photo of me, sending it back to my family. We've been collaborating for 30 years. And now we're seeing the fruits of that sustained focus of being better together. And we're getting a greater uptake. And I'd love to see that globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I think we can talk for hours, and I will come back to you. A few points I took away, that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come, right? So thank you for your persistence and your humility in coming forward with those commitments despite the challenges that your people have gone through over the past few hundred years. It's exciting to see these doors opening. So we'll come back to you, please, don't worry. And you can also hear more from Phil in a moment. Loretta, over to you. From your perspective, what do you think, or what types of commitments are needed to ensure the protection of freshwater ecosystems, to reduce the impact of disasters? And what is it that UNDRR are doing to make that happen?
Indeed, it's very moving what you just said, and the reality is that the recurrent theme in today's session: we need to stop messing with nature. The reality is that we are creating risk faster than we can manage it, and this is not only through climate change, it's through the mismanagement of our natural resources and the development decisions that we're making every day. And of course, we're seeing this manifested in water-related disasters that are responsible now for 90% of people affected by all disasters and 95% of all infrastructure loss and damage. And so one of the challenges we see from UNDRR is that many of these water-related disasters are what we call high-frequency, low-intensity, which means that we can't even measure them. They're recurring regularly, systematically, eroding development gains, and we don't even have the means to really understand fully what is the impact that we're seeing, especially at the local level. One of the messages that we've brought to this COP is that we want to see us work towards a world of zero climate disasters. And that means acknowledging that hazards are there, but also acknowledging that far more can be done around vulnerability and exposure to disasters to reduce the impact of climate-related disasters. And right now, the investment simply is not there. We are not focusing our attention on reducing vulnerability sufficiently. So concretely, some of the things that our small office, UNDRR, we're only 120 people globally, but what we see as some very critical areas where we can support are really threefold. The first one is what we call comprehensive risk management. Right now, we see different siloed institutions working sometimes in parallel, but not enough together to address the climate emergency, including water-related disasters. Through a comprehensive risk management approach, which integrates disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, water management, humanitarian action, we're really trying to ensure that the process of planning and programming is lessened for countries, that it doesn't become a burden as they each try to implement the Sendai framework on one hand, the Paris Agreement on another, the SDGs. I mean, what we ultimately want is climate-sensitive, risk-informed, sustainable development. And that means we need to come together for this. And at the core of this is our promotion of nature-based solutions, which are right now not fully recognized in national disaster risk reduction strategies. It's growing, and we've developed some tools such as a Words into Action on nature-based solutions, but there's still a tremendous amount of advocacy and capacity building that needs to be done, especially with national disaster management agencies and others who have some responsibility, planning ministries, to really look at solutions that are nature-friendly. So this is an area of work that we are significantly scaling up. The second one is around risk knowledge. There is data and information, but sitting very scattered in countries. And so we have developed a risk information platform that is aggregating all of the different data around exposure, vulnerability, hazards, climate projection, water, displacement patterns, and making it available to all the stakeholders and helping them analyze and use this information to make better decisions, risk-informed decisions. And a third area is around promoting more local action. We have an initiative called Making Cities Resilient, which has nearly 2,000 cities now that are working with 11 different organizations to build resilient strategies at the local level. And I think this is really important because this is where water-related disasters are being felt the greatest, is at the local level. But there are some challenges as well. We see that we need to close knowledge gaps. We have information, especially around nature-based solutions, around small-scale projects, but we're not sure what this looks like at scale. And I also think we need to do more research into the context, because nature-based solutions in one context is not the same as another. So we need some more context-specific, and I think we need to scale up the public-private partnerships. And my final comment, and this is something I would like to raise in the more broad context, we're not focusing enough attention on fragile context. There is a challenge of countries that are already facing conflict, who are being dramatically underserved by the climate community. They are being left behind. And these are the ones where we are seeing drought, where we are seeing tremendous water scarcity, and yet they are really at risk of not receiving the climate finance that they need to build resilience. And we know the humanitarian envelope is half empty. So we need to do more to bring resources to these really most fragile contexts where the people are suffering the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. I couldn't agree with you more. And again, as an institution trying to inform the way investment decisions or business decisions are being taken, what we're seeing is the emergence of what we're calling this just transition, of course, right? And that those key decisions are being taken to walk away from a high carbon emitting asset in vulnerable locations because of its carbon footprint. And the financial institution can say, great, we've reduced our impact. However, that asset still remains and is generally then put back into the hands of institutions that are more vulnerable and less able to manage them. So I think there's hopefully a crossover there that we can explore further. Torgny, over to you. From your perspective, what commitments are needed to ensure the protection of freshwater ecosystems to reduce the impact of disasters? And what is it that SIWI are doing to accelerate this?
Thanks, Cate, for raising this important perspective, which is close to my heart and to us at SIWI. What we bring to this COP is how to build a more resilient future with water, also with nature, or from water to nature. And I agree with Armar that we should not mess with nature. We need a new compact with nature. And there I quote Inger Andersen, the head of UNEP last year. I think that is a very good expression. And that will we bring to the UN Water Conference, also come up in New York next year. One key advantage with water, we have challenges. It's a local asset, a local commodity, but it's building up to a looming global water crisis. But one key advantage, it's a truly global issue. If I compare the different SDGs, I think water, there might be more, is the truly global. Why is that? Because we have the same challenges all over the world, whether we live in the global north or global south, east or west, and we can learn from each other. I think that is a key advantage with water, and that is why the upcoming water conference is that important in March next year. So what commitments are needed? Well, first maybe decision makers, whether you are private, public or academia, etc., need to understand better the complexity and that all parts are integrated. Land, fresh water, ocean, climate, etc. But as we all know, unfortunately, our governance systems are not built to take that on. We have silo thinking internationally and locally and also nationally. So I think that is the first part. And here I believe, and here I also think that the young generation put it on the agenda. We need to learn from science, because science tells us that integrated approaches, that is the way to handle future and current challenges. And this week, it's still the first week of COP, we released a report together with Peak Potsdam, the Research Institute on Climate Change, and also with the UNDP, GIZ, and Stockholm Resilience Center, that actually water plays a more critical role for mitigation. We are mainly discussing adaptation, and that is for sure very important, but also mitigation. If we don't take action, we might risk come to a future where wetlands as of today, so oceans will become water carbon emitters rather than carbon sinks. And that is a trajectory we don't like to see. But I still believe there are many untapped solutions today. I will come back later on, but we have some integrated approaches, which is like the action platform for social sea management, where we integrate upstream, downstream actors, how they investments, actions also impact each other. I think that is one part of interlink water, freshwater, land use, and also coastal and marine ecosystems. This is so critical for poverty reduction and for disaster risk reduction that we take on this integrated approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Torgny. I couldn't agree more. On the topic of disaster risk reduction, Loretta, I'll come back to you with a question. The Dutch minister earlier spoke about a commitment that is being prepared among WMO, UNDRR, IFRC, it is a veritable acronym soup here, and the Dutch Climate Centre to connect the global data to local action. You mentioned again about the importance of local decision-making, local context. Can you elaborate on the role of UNDRR and how the lens of risk management can lead to investments in water?
Thank you very much. Well, we are hugely excited by this initiative because it's actually tackling one of the biggest problems we have: scattered interventions that are not connected and therefore are not as impactful as possible. And what's happening with this partnership, it is allowing three absolutely core institutions at the national level to come together through the support of our agencies. One are the national disaster management agencies, which obviously have responsibility for DRR and for responding to disasters, but also the Met services through the World Meteorological Organizations, and finally through the Red Cross movement, really reaching down into communities and that local action and bringing together civil society. So the aim of this initiative is, as you say, to pull together the global policy work that's being carried out. And I can just give one example. The newly formed Center of Excellence on Disaster and Climate Resilience, which is bringing together 14 agencies, the Red Cross movement, and the science community to come together to develop what we're calling solutions packages. And these solutions packages are really trying to pull together the solutions needed across the DRR, humanitarian, development, sectoral, adaptation sectors together to help decision makers understand how to better manage drought before the drought impacts occur, or heat waves, or torrential rains, or cyclones. So it's really focusing on those ex-ante preventative measures. And the work that will be taking place at the national level, along with the World Meteorological Organization project on increasing alerts and observation, is really going to enable communities to be on the front line of early warning systems. So this entire initiative that we're doing is going to be part and parcel of the Secretary General's Early Warnings for All initiative. And we hope to be working in about 5 or 6 water-stressed countries, really with a focus on learning lessons and going rapidly to scale in terms of national, local, and then global policies that are geared towards reducing the impact of water-related stresses.
Fabulous. That's so exciting, Loretta. And again, well, 5 is a good start. There are many, many, many vulnerable places, right? So that ambition around the moving forward further and faster will be vital. Again, our experience at CDP with regards to helping the private sector wake up to these issues is when they were able to put a price on water-related risk and climate-related risk. Typically, water is noise on a profit and loss sheet for most of these institutions, right? It doesn't really cost an awful lot, and therefore, why should they act? What's different? The moment we ask them to start quantifying and disclosing how much economic value or total revenue is at risk by their business, they wake up to the risk and are much more likely to act. So it can be a very powerful motivator for change. Phil, I'm going to come to you last, if you don't mind. We'll just go straight to Torgny for a quick intervention, Torgny, if you don't mind. Now, SIWI hosts the Source to Sea platform. What are you doing to reduce, what is that particular platform doing to reduce disaster risk through its activities, and what is its vision and ambitions when looking towards UN23 Water Conference?
Yeah, thanks. This international platform has been around for a few years. I think now the awareness is around about the Source to Sea concept, linking upstream, downstream. We were part of the Oceans Conference, the UN Oceans Conference earlier this year, and also here at COP. And also when there were preparatory meetings for the upcoming UN Water Conference, the President of General Assembly mentioned that to be one of his 3 priorities for the conference about the Source to Sea concept, or linking upstream and downstream. So that will bring us to the UN Water Conference. As I mentioned, I think, well, science tells us we need to have more integrated approaches in the future to take on the challenges. And I think there are at least 4 actions that we will bring with us, and I think also that we as a global community should also continue to discuss and also come up with solutions, meeting in New York eventually. Number 1, that we should mainstream this concept, not concept, but the approach of Source to Sea thinking in our climate action plans at all levels, local, national, global. Number 2, climate action must also give priority to investments in ecosystems, also building on this integrated approach, Source to Sea. Number 3, circular approaches are needed to end pollution. And we know plastic pollution in the ocean, where does it come from? Land-based activities, and that is a given. So circular approaches are needed. And number 4, coordinated actions are needed also to bring in and also include all kind of all stakeholders, be they private, public, research, indigenous people, etc. We should be all into it. And I think this is what I learned so far. I've been at COP 1 day. And this is about adaptation. Adaptation starts and ends at the local level. It's about what you do on the local level. That counts. So that is why it's so important to include also the stakeholders at the local level in decision making. It's not easy. This is quite complex. We haven't solved it on the national level, but I think we need to take it on more horizontally in the future. And that is what I will bring with us, and also for the upcoming COP. We need to look into the the water conference, of course. We need the incentives, are there laws to be changed, and our governance structure, and also actions. This is a very important part. Finally, before I give the floor to some on the podium, if you would like to learn more about the Global Commission on Economics of Water, 8:30 Monday morning at the Water Pavilion, Aramar, and Professor Jan Rockström will tell us more. It's about for media and for anyone who would like to know more about that. Thanks.
Nicely done, Torgny, thank you. And indeed, whilst resilience and adaptation and climate-related risk is local, unfortunately, in this globalized world, it does have often have global ramifications. Phil, back to you. So, for the last word on the panel, what more experiences can you bring to the table, or are you bringing to the table that can be scaled and implemented by others, so we can all be better stewards of the freshwater resources that we're here to talking about today, but also other natural environments? Please.
Maramu, thank you. I believe if we keep looking in the rear vision mirror, that's all you're going to see is the past. But the past should shape the way we look at the future together. I had a wonderful experience at SIWI this year when I saw 2 water brothers, Hank and Sultan Razim Zoda, stand up and unite. Well, there are many water brothers and there are many water sisters globally that want to share the journey, to be involved. I believe that the missing ingredient is the localism, local communities, not just Indigenous communities. There is no greater intelligence about the impacts in the local footprint than that can come from those local people. I believe that we have a wonderful platform of opportunity before us to look at Indigenous ways of managing country. In Australia, we call it fire stick management. greener burns, lesser emissions, and the same can be done with water and water management. I believe that we need to look at demystifying Western science, policy, legislation, and water speak to be able to build the strength and the capacity and the knowledge, therefore the confidence of local communities to come together and not operate in isolation of one another. I asked a challenge I probably put right now is for our water leaders, for our leaders, our decision makers, to come to the table with a wondering mind and leave your preconceived positions at the door or at the community door and come sit and listen. Don't just listen here. Don't just look, watch. Don't just touch, but feel. I believe that we need to reset the agenda on what the future looks like. What works in one country can work in another. I want to come back to that cultural science being a missing ingredient. We are seeing a greater partnerships and collaboration between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, and our decision makers in Australia allowing us to have that dialogue, to set the agenda, to provide the frank and fearless advice. And for, another aspect from an Indigenous position is that we have this cultural responsibility, this cultural obligation to care for country, to care for people. And water should connect us. It should not divide us. It's something that I want us as a collective globally, and particularly my two water brothers, Sultan and Hank, as we move into 2023 at the UN Water Conference. I truly hope that there is a wonderful opportunity for Indigenous people globally to come together. And I hope that you be the champions that you are, but be the champions for Indigenous people around the world and support us to come and share our knowledge, to realise our cultural obligations, share the load, share the journey, and share the outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I don't think I need to say anything more. Water brothers and sisters, please join me again in a warm round of applause for our panel.
Can I get a photo?
Of course, we're going to take photos after the event. We've just got one final speaker who's coming up on the stage now. She has got her running shoes on, which is great, but probably not the one she has been running in for the last hundreds or so days. It gives me really great pleasure to welcome a warm friend of mine, Mina Ghuli, onto the stage. Mina, as you may know, is an ultramarathon runner and CEO of Theirs Foundation, and she's going to knock our socks off. So I would advise panelists to sit so you can see the visuals ahead. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you very much, Cate, and thank you very much, all of you, for the warm welcome and for sitting through what's been an incredible 2 panels talking about all the important things in life, particularly water. 4 days ago, I was sitting on the top of a barren mountain in Jordan, overlooking the pink desert sands that stretched far into the distance. I'd paused my run for the day because I wanted to chat to a very old Bedouin friend, and I wanted to talk to him about water and climate. He knew I was coming to COP, and he asked me, "What are you going to say?" And I said to him, "Let me flip this. Let me ask you, if you were standing here today, what would you say to the people in the room?" "That's easy," he said. "I'd tell them, you read it, but we live it." He's right. And it's not only him, and it's not only there in Jordan. Over the last 7 months, I've run 126 of the 200 marathons I've committed to do in the lead up to the UN summit next year. It's a journey that's taken me to the front lines of the water crisis, into homes, villages, factories, farms, into offices and boardrooms right across the world. I've run deep into the Samburu in northern Kenya, where severe water scarcity means that herders have dug their wells so deep into the ground, they need a human daisy chain to pass the buckets up to the surface to feed their animals. I've run down rivers like the Loire and the Danube and the Rhine in Europe, where drought made headlines over summer and the water was so low I could walk under the bridges. Where economic shocks of the water and climate crisis were visible in the lines of cruise boats docked on the banks, offloading their passengers to buses because they could no longer navigate the waterways. In Uzbekistan, I ran across the Aral Sea. What I saw there broke my heart. The death of a mighty ecosystem. Carcasses of fishing boats lying in the desert sands, stranded. Communities struggling to rebuild. And too many questions about why, despite all the signs, we failed to act. And why we're still failing now. Climbing high up into the mountains of Central Asia and Switzerland, I've seen streams of water flowing out of the bottom of glaciers and bridges and roads washed away by floodwaters that are coming earlier and more destructively. We need to act, and we need to do it now. As one of the local guides said to me as we were climbing up to the glaciers, "Mina, please tell these people directly, look around you. The time for soft language is over. We need real action and we need it now." He's not alone. Over the last few years, we've grown a grassroots movement for change. Thousands and thousands of people in over 197 countries and territories around the world, literally stepping up for water. Mums, dads, kids, people who have welcomed me into each town we've run through, and who are part of a community that inspires me every single day to go bigger and bolder, to do whatever it takes to close the gap on SDG 6. Because this is no longer about single, isolated water problems. This is a global cry for help from farmers, from kids, from scientists, water experts, and families right across this precious planet. The UN 2023 summit must be our answer. Thanks to the leadership of the governments of the Netherlands and Tajikistan, we have an opportunity to step up to the water challenge, to reach across traditional boundaries, to turn away from failing past practices and vested interests, and to make concrete commitments that will change the lives of millions. Governments investing in water and healthy freshwater ecosystems, businesses assessing and responding to their worsening water risks, and individuals valuing every drop. I'm not suggesting this is going to be easy, but big goals need us to be prepared to do hard things, like running ridiculous numbers of marathons in some of the most extreme places on the planet, on the front lines of the water crisis, or solving the water crisis itself. But this is not a journey we take alone. It's a journey we take surrounded by the power of our community and united by a common goal. Because water is not your problem or my problem. Water is everybody's business. So here is my challenge to all of you in this room. As Henk Ovink led us in Dushanbe, I'm going to ask you all right now to stand up where you are. I'm going to ask you to hold the hands, the elbows, or the wrists of the people around you. And just like we did in Dushanbe at the high-level event, I want you to stand together. We are one community. Why? Because solving this global water crisis is about so much more than any one of us. This is about all of us. It's about all of us standing together. Because while individually every one of you can make an impact, together in 2023, as we stand together, we will change the world. Thank you very much.